Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another tier list. Today we are ranking every hero in Deadlock after how easy they are to learn and to play. This game is very overwhelming for new players, and I thought this tier list could help new players get into the game a little bit faster. First, we're going to start with Abrams. Now, I think Abrams is definitely one of the heroes a beginner can play. He's not too complicated. Essentially, you just roll your face across your keyboard and enemies will die. Still one of the strongest heroes in the game. You can play close combat. Your laning stage is pretty good. He doesn't have any exceptionally weak spots during the game. So I think Abrams is one of the best heroes for a new player. Next up, we have Bebop. I do not think that you should play Bebop too much when you're starting. His toolkit might feel lackluster. His hook needs skill shots. He needs positioning. He can easily get overrun. So I think that Bebop is one of those heroes that will not be too easy to pick up straight away. But if you do, I promise you, you'll have a lot of fun. Next up, we have Dynamo. Dynamo is a hero that has enormous impact, but it requires a lot of team synergy to make it work. His ult doesn't really do damage. It does a little bit when it's maxed out, but it really requires you to play around your team, play around timings, rotate correctly, and be in the right place at the right time. Therefore, I do not think that Dynamo is the ideal hero for a new player either. Even though he is fairly tanky, he has healing, and he has a way of getting away, I just don't think you're gonna have that much impact and maybe not that much fun straight away playing Dynamo. So I think he also goes in B tier. Great Talon. Great Talon is one of the heroes with the lowest win rates in the game. He is very weak in terms of like he's easy to kill. He needs really good positioning to be relevant, and he needs good farm. His toolkit isn't too advanced, but I think it's more due to the way his toolkit is designed that positioning makes it a little bit harder to play. So I think Great Talon also goes in the same boat as Bebop and Dynamo, where I wouldn't necessarily play him as one of my first heroes, simply because it is very easy to get ran over by an Abrams. Okay, then we have Haze. Haze is one of those heroes that if you come from an FPS game, you just pick up this hero and it instantly feels good. It's got a passive that scales your damage up. You've got a sleep dart and you can go invisible, and your ult is just a flurry of AoE. I think for sure Haze is an excellent choice for a new player. So I'm gonna put Haze right up there. Don't think she requires too much understanding to get into the game. And then we have Infernus. Infernus is also a DPS that is fairly similar to Haze. I'd say it's a little more complicated because he doesn't just build damage items and he does damage. He is usually built around his afterburn, which does a lot of damage over time. So the itemization might be a little bit more confusing. His ult is a big AoE stun. He has a flame dash, which is pretty cool. And he has a few like combos that aren't necessarily that straightforward as Haze. I still think he's an easier hero to pick up than a lot of other heroes, but I'm gonna put him in A tier. Next up, we have Ivy. Ivy is currently one of the strongest heroes in the game. She is very aim dependent. Her gun is really good to use, but I do not think that she's a very beginner friendly hero because her ult makes her fly around, and you can either use that to like split push, and then when people are coming to defend, you can fly out, or you can use it to fly a teammate out. But I think for new players, I think parts of her toolkit won't feel as natural and won't be that easy to get into, even though I think you can become a really strong player by playing her. So I think I'm gonna put Ivy in B tier as well. Then we have Kelvin. Kelvin is easy to play. Kelvin has a very strong beam that hardly needs you to aim. He scales really well with Spirit. He can also play support, do a lot of healing. He is fairly tanky, and has insane movement ability, so you can easily get out of fights. His ult is kind of like an oh shit button. You can either use it to isolate the 1v1 or you can use it to just heal yourself. Kelvin, to me, is an A tier. Then we have Lady Geist. Lady Geist uses all her abilities, pretty much sacrifice her health. It requires a lot of positioning. Her ult is a health swap, which is really good, but it requires you to be close to your target. I think new players should avoid Lady Geist because you will screw up the ult. And I think a lot of her toolkit just is not that simple to figure out. So I think she's also a C tier. I'm also gonna reorder stuff in the C tier here to make people understand which one's within the same. I think like this, and I think that's fine for now. Then we have Lash. Lash is one of the most fun heroes to play. He can displace enemies and he is very fun, but I will say he requires a lot of practice and he will feel very weak when you first start the game. I think picking him up early is something, then you would have to like one trick him for a while. I just don't think that he's going to feel that natural to play. There's a lot of movement combos. It requires you to be pretty good at movement as well. So I think that Lash also goes in B tier. Then next up we have McGinnis. McGinnis is a fairly beginner-friendly hero. She has a very strong gun. She can kind of just AFK, push in the lane. Her ult is very strong if you want to go Spirit. You can put down turrets to help you. She's not as simple as Abrams and Haze, but I think she's one of those heroes that a lot of beginners kind of just pick up and play. You can heal yourself. You can wall off the enemies. I don't think you're necessarily going to like perform that well, but I think McGinnis destroys a lot of lower tier lobbies. So I'm going to put her in A. Still after those two though. Krill is in like a weird spot where his toolkit isn't too hard to get used to. He's very tanky, he has a lifesteal, he has a disarm. But I still do think that because it requires some coordination, because unless you have a lot of farm, you are gonna struggle to kill someone with the ult because it doesn't do that much damage. It requires you to synergize with your team. I think Krill kind of goes in that same category as Dynamo, where you're trying to play around your team, which makes it a lot harder to pick up straight away. I think for a beginner, you just want to pick up a hero that you can like quote unquote solo carry with and you'll have a lot more fun. So I'm going to put him next to Dynamo. And then we have Paradox. I remember when I first started playing, I clicked on Paradox and I thought, this hero is really shit. And then I played this game for 400 hours. Now I feel like this hero is the shit. Because every time I play against Paradox in higher elo lobbies, I get destroyed. Her ult has like a 30-second cooldown. She swaps you around. But my point here being, don't start playing Paradox until you know the game better. This is definitely a C tier hero for a beginner. I actually think I might just put Lady Geist down here too. I still think that Lady Geist is harder to play than these heroes. And speaking of heroes that you really should not play until you know the game better is Pocket. Pocket is a hero that excels when he has 4 active items in his inventory. There's a lot of combos. You got to be aware of your surroundings. Your ult applies a dot and then you got to like fly in with Majestic Leap, amplify damage with Barrage, land, ult, suitcase, cloak. And then you get superior cooldown and you have 4 active items and your brain just like goes to mush just thinking about it. So I'm going to put Pocket even further down than Paradox. I think that is also an insanely hard hero to play for new players. And then we have 7. If I'm going to quote the majority of people who came into my chat talking about hero balance, they usually have one thing in common. They either go, wow, 7 is so busted, he presses his ult, and then the entire lobby dies. And in a lot of cases, you are correct. When your base is being attacked, or if you are pushing their base, 7 floats up in the air with his storm cloud, and you can just like release your keyboard and mouse and do a little dance because it just destroys everybody, especially if you have Mystic Slow. As you get higher up in ranks, people know how to counter this by using Bebop hooks or Bebop ult or a knockdown. There's a lot of other ways to counter it too, Lash ult, but I definitely agree 7 is one of the highest pick rate and highest win rate heroes in the game for a very good reason across all skill tiers. And I'd definitely say that he is an S tier hero. I'd say he still is slightly harder to learn than Abrams and Haze because he's got 3 active abilities while these ones have only 2. Next up we have Shiv. Shiv is the newest hero added to the game. He is in a lot of ways similar to Abrams. He's got a passive that makes him more tanky. Then he's got a dash ability and an ability that slows. Itemizing as Shiv is a little more complicated because you can kind of either move him towards a spell damage oriented build with cooldowns and that focus on his dash reset or his dagger damage, or a more weapon oriented build. Because he's so tanky, I think he's a little more beginner friendly than a lot of other heroes because I still think he's one of the strongest heroes in the game. But I think he's a little more complicated to pick up than, for instance, Abrams. So I'm gonna put him here right after McGinnis. Then we have Vindicta. Vindicta is the kind of classic archetype hero for anyone who comes from an FPS game and just wants to come in and shoot heads. Her ult is like an operator from Valorant. It's like she scopes in and snipes and does a lot of damage. She has one of the highest damaging guns in the game. She's one of the best ranges in the game. I think the biggest downside with Vindicta is that she's very squishy and she suffers from a lot of the same issues that Great Talon has, where for a new player, sometimes it's very easy to overextend. So I don't think she's as easy to play as Abrams, Haze, and 7. Her toolkit is slightly more advanced. Her stake is a skill shot. And both Vindicta and Grey Talon and Paradox have the 3 lowest win rates in the game, by the way, which also represents something about how hard they are to play in different brackets. But I'd still say she's definitely up here in the A tier, but I'm giving her some minus points for just like being very squishy. But yeah. Next up we have Viscous. Viscous is another hero that when I started playing this game, I was like, what the hell is going on here? I noticed his ult was like hamster ball, and don't do it. Do yourself a favor and do not start playing Viscous until you are better at the game. He's a very fun hero. I think becoming a Viscous one trick is something that, like, if you want to one trick a hero, this is definitely one of those to do it. But yeah, if you play against a good Viscous, you'll hate your life. If you try Viscous yourself when you're just started the game, you will also hate your life. So I'm also going to put him down here next to Pocket because it's just very overwhelming to learn this hero in the beginning. The reason why I'm saying this in general, by the way, is that when you're playing a new game that has a lot of new mechanics, the idea is that if you have a easier hero to play, you can focus more on what's happening in the game as a whole. You can focus on your objectives, you can focus on the team fights and stuff. But the harder it is to like do all the combos and use all the abilities of your own hero, the less you will focus on having an overview of what's going on. And that is why I'm saying that, like, in terms of if you're a new player, what you could do, you can start at the top of this tier list and play these heroes and just work your way down. And as you work your way down, your understanding of the game will also increase. And then suddenly these heroes will feel less and less overwhelming as time goes by. Okay, next up we have Warden. Warden has one of the highest win rates across all the tiers too. You know, Warden is a little bit complicated to me. I don't think he's that easy to play. I don't think he's that easy to pick up. I think he's very strong, and I think he gets bonus points for being tanky, but he's also got 4 active abilities. He requires a lot of active items to also be played well, because they usually play him with like the super movement speed build, and that also makes him harder to aim with. So mechanically, it also becomes more challenging, because the faster you move, the harder it is to hit your enemies. I'm still gonna put him up in the top of B tier, just because he's also very tanky, and that does make it easier for you. Like, he can definitely get out of shit, and like if you overextend, you don't necessarily instantly die like Vindicta does. Then you have Wraith. Wraith is another hero that kind of feels very natural to play if you come from an FPS game. She has a passive that, well, it's kind of a passive, but you can also activate it to increase your attack speed. She has an escape tool, and she has a bunch of cards that she throws that kind of auto aims, and her ult also auto aims and stuns them. So I think she's a pretty straightforward hero to play for new players. I think she's right up here next to Kelvin. Yeah, she's pretty straightforward, I'd say. I think she's definitely not too complicated. I think she's still very fun to play too, and especially when you scale into late game and you get that insane fire rate, she's very fun. And then last but not least, we have Yamato. Yamato is not easy to play. She has a gap closing utility. She has an ult that makes her immune. It requires a lot of button pressing and usually a lot of active items too. I think she easily can feel similar, like the same situation as playing Pocket and Paradox. She is very fun once you get good at her, but I just think that she's too complicated for most people, and especially because it requires you to be in a melee range in a lot of occasions. I think it's very easy to just get stunned and die. So we're also going to put her next to Pocket and Paradox. So that was the tier list for new players. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content for daily uploads. We have guides coming out pretty much every day on the main channel, and we have daily match VODs coming out on the second channel. So don't forget to check that out as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.